Yeah? Okay. Good morning. Today's meeting of the Neighborhood and Affordable Housing Advisory Board is called to order on June 9th, 2020. Welcome, everyone. Agendas of today's meetings are on the wall at the entrance to the chambers. Please remember to turn off your cell phones. To ensure a complete record of this board's actions, we ask that each member of the public wishing to speak clearly state your name and spell your last name for the clerk. And it is great to see everyone again in person. While seeing all of you is a good thing, let's all be reminded that we need to continue to follow the precautions that have become such a big part of our daily lives over the last several weeks. The boardroom has been set up so we can conduct business of the board while staying compliant with social distancing guidelines. If and when anyone gets up to move around, please respect the space of those around you. I've been asked to inform any board members not sitting in front of a microphone that he or she will need to step to the podium when speaking at any time during the meeting. It appears that all board members are mic'd. Ms. Sullivan, can you confirm this?
I'm sorry?
Can you confirm that all of the board members are mic'd?
Yes.
Thank you. Will the board members please introduce yourselves and state the fields you represent, beginning to my right?
Good morning, Camille Hepting. I represent the employers within the City of Clearwater.
Carmen Santiago, for the people.
Gabby Camacho, Housing.
Pete Scalia, low-income people.
Kevin Chenault, nonprofit industry.
Okay, thank you. Our first order of business is to review and approve the minutes of the board's May 1st, 2020 special meeting. May I have a motion of approval?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
A second?
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes are approved. If there is anyone here to speak on items, if there's anyone here to speak to items not on today's agenda, is there? No? Seeing no one coming forward, we will move on to the next item. Item 4 is new business. Item 4.1, recommend funding allegations for the fiscal year 2021 annual action plan, which is the first action plan of the fiscal year 2021, fiscal year 24-25, fourth in the consolidated plan as required by HUD. Mr. Lane will present this item.
Thank you. Chuck Lane, Assistant Director, Economic Development and Housing Department. It's been a bit of a whirlwind putting this together, as you might imagine, with everything going on. My broken foot hasn't helped matters either, so schedule's been tight, but I think we've done a nice job putting this together for you. So what we've asked you to do today is to approve our recommended funding allocations to the various agencies that we work with throughout the year. So I have a PowerPoint to take you through really all the funding that we've laid out that we're proposing in our annual action plan. So for a recap, our consolidated plan is the long-term planning document that we have in the housing division. It's really our Bible for how we spend those federal dollars. So the consolidated plan is, right now we're in the last year of a 4-year plan. This annual action plan will be the first annual action plan in the next consolidated plan, which will be for the next 5 years, beginning on 10/1, okay? So the consolidated plan is a planning document, a long-range planning document that identifies our goals and objectives and how we're going to spend these funds. And then every year we produce an annual action plan which creates activities and projects that are in line and consistent with those goals and objectives. Okay, so that's how the two work with each other. The annual action plan that we're working on now that you're here talking about today, that will actually be part of the consolidated plan. That will be within that document. Let's see. So all of the funding that we spend with these federal dollars, and also with the state dollars that we have, the state dollars are not part of this annual action plan, but we can talk about them today if you'd like. But all of the projects and activities that we have and the goals and objectives can all be boiled down into at least one of these objectives. Of course, safe, decent, affordable housing for qualifying low to moderate income households. Public facilities is a big part of our CDBG program. We fund public service programs. The public service programs is probably where we reach the most people served. And of course, we facilitate economic development projects as well. So this is what we've done so far. On February 28th, we issued a notice of funding availability and began a 30-day application period. Okay, we extended that application period through to April 10th because of the COVID-19 situation. People were having difficulties getting those applications done, which was completely understandable. On April 14th, all of those groups were scheduled to present their projects, their applications to this board, which is annually a fantastic meeting because we learn a lot about these organizations at that meeting. Unfortunately, we had to cancel that meeting for obvious reasons. And on April 30th, the Technical Review Committee reviewed the application. Prior to 4:30, they reviewed the applications, and on April 30th, we had a meeting to discuss the Technical Review Committee's opinions of those applications and their scoring. Mr. Chenault was on that committee. Rosemary Call was on that committee as well. She's our city clerk, and we had a member from the Homeless Leadership Alliance on that committee as well. On June 9th, which is today, that's where we are. We're asking you to recommend, to approve the recommended funding allocations for this plan. So we start with our entitlement. Every year we get funding from the federal government in the form of CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Program funds, and Home Investment Partnership Program funds. So these are the entitlements from last year into this year. You can see we had a decent increase this year. We've seen, over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen increases annually, some smaller than others, but we're going in the right direction. They haven't backed up, which, the state funding has been a little bit more volatile. The federal funding has been fairly consistent, which is a good thing. So let's start with public services. We received 21 applications. That included 3 applications for home buyer education. It's on the slide, it also included 3 applications for down payment administration. I think we'll talk about that later in the presentation. The funding allocations are for 12 public service programs. There was one that was denied at the recommendation of the TRC. There was actually another that we discussed the potential to deny. We decided to include them. So there are 12 public service applications that were approved that are subject to the 15% cap. And what that means is we're allowed to spend up to 15% of our entitlement on public services. So that amount is $125,604. So we cannot exceed that. Now, HUD has lifted that cap this year and for next year for COVID-19 related public services. So we're leaving the flexibility in our program to fund public services as they come to us and they show us that there's a need. We're still able to fund those services to respond to the pandemic. So, and in the annual action plan, the allocations you're receiving today, we've actually reserved $180,000 for that purpose. So these are our public service recommendations. You can see a lot of familiar faces there. Interculture Advocacy Institute, terrific program right in the heart of downtown Clearwater. Pinellas Opportunity Council, Shore Services, helps elderly folks in Clearwater. Gulf Coast Legal Services, terrific organization, particularly now in the pandemic. They're helping people with fair housing issues, which has really become a very big concern with evictions and people falling behind in their mortgages and rents and stuff. Kimberly Home, an organization that helps women and newborn children or pregnant women as well. Pinellas RCS Grace House, terrific operation serving homeless families. One of the few places in Pinellas County where that service is offered. West Care Gulf Coast, Miracles Outreach, Safety Harbor Neighborhood Family Services. All these folks we have relationships with and are good organizations. HEP, St. Vincent de Paul, Mr. Scalia is the CEO of that organization. Fresh Start Ministries and Mentoring, that is a new group to us. They're helping people that are recently released from prison, people that are on probation. When we had our neighborhood groups, our neighborhood meetings, that consistently came up as an issue. People trying to get themselves back into society having difficulty, and this group addresses that directly, as well as PERC, Pinellas Ex-Offender Reentry Coalition. PERC is working with St. Vincent de Paul on their program as well, and getting people more acclimated to the job environment and teaching job skills. So this is the education counseling. We do it every year, $3,500 for each. That seems to be right around the over-under in terms of what these agencies spend on home buyer education. There will be there's an additional rule this year with HUD to require one-on-one home buyer education. These groups will do that as well, although we'll assign that as a project cost. We don't need to earmark it in our CDBG program. Public facilities. We had one public facilities project that we denied because it was a housing project. It wasn't actually a public facilities project, and we'll still try to work with that organization on that housing project. So you can see some very familiar faces. Directions for Living, continuing to upgrade their headquarters facility. HEP, continuing to rehab their adult shelter rehabilitation facility. RCS has put in an application to rehab their food pantry program, their facility. They do a lot of work, and it's a facility that's much needed for rehabilitation. It's hasn't had any TLC in a while, I think. Salvation Army, they're going to be doing some security improvements. The Arc of Tampa Bay is going to do some improvements to their facility at the Long Center, which is a city-owned facility. And we're planning improvements to Belmont Park, which is pretty exciting. We're going to put in a basketball court and make some other general upgrades to that park as well. So we're able to take percentages of the funding we get and put it towards administration, which for the most part is the salaries of housing staff. Administration dollars are also used for other things, but primarily for housing staff. So with CDBG, we're allowed to take 20% of our entitlement. In home, we can take 10% of entitlement, 10% of program income. And this does not include our SHIP entitlement, which is the state dollars. Our SHIP entitlement, we can take 10% of our entitlement and 5% of program administration. So economic development microenterprise, we've had this in our portfolio for a few years now. Tampa Bay Black Business Investment Corporation and Hispanic Business Initiative Fund of Florida. They offer technical assistance to entrepreneurs and small business owners. We're reserving $80,000 for a facade improvement program. We actually have one that we've been working on for a while and it hasn't come to fruition, and that's on North Fort Harrison. So we want to really try to get that program going a little bit more. And then down the road, we have some money set aside for economic development projects, and that's in our revolving loan fund for economic development. That funding could be used to respond to businesses that are having trouble with COVID-19. So we're leaving that kind of available to us. The housing pool is where we have the lion's share of our money. So we do, as I mentioned earlier, down payment assistance and loan processing. We have 3 organizations that do that for us. We pay them $1,000 per loan that they close. I think 30 loans is a little ambitious, but it'd be great if we could pull that off. That program is having difficulties right now because when you're trying to fund a person at 80% of AMI for a loan, there's difficulty in getting that first mortgage. With no first mortgage, there's no down payment assistance. So that's really where the struggle is on that one. But we're doing the best we can. We're working hard at it. And then for available housing projects, we have in our revolving loan fund, we have $965,000, that's CDBG money. And then in home funding, we have about $2.6 million. So we have some projects that we've been working on and discussing that I believe may come to fruition this coming fiscal year. So we're excited about that. I think we'll draw down a lot of that funding for these projects. We do like to keep a balance of home money, so when an impactful project comes our way, we're able to fund it. We'd hate to see projects not get built because we don't have the funding to help. So there's little balancing act we need to play with that funding. The CHODO requirement, the CHODO is a community housing development organization. It's really HUD's way of requiring local governments to work with small development organizations that are part of the local community. Instead of working with the larger folks, they say you got to spend at least 15% of your allocation on these smaller groups. We've done that regularly with Bright Community Trust. They've done rehab programs for us where they buy a home. We help them buy the home, fix it up, and then they sell it to a qualifying homeowner. That's been our model for our CHODO projects in the last few years, and it's worked well. HUD has softened this requirement. They haven't eliminated it, but what they've said is if you don't meet your CHODO requirement after 3 years, you can request HUD to reallocate those funds, where prior they would take the funds from you. Other local governments, I think, are having difficulty getting those CHODO dollars out. We really haven't. So we'll probably continue to meet this requirement. So the next steps after today, on June 14th, which is next Sunday, our public comment period begins. We'll post our annual action plan to our website so people can view that and provide us with comments. And then that ends on July 13th. On July 14th, we'll meet with you all again, and we'll ask you to recommend council approval of our annual action plan. On 2 days later, on the 16th, we will present the annual action plan, and by the way, the consolidated plan as well, to City Council for approval. We have to submit these plans to HUD no later than August 15th. We'll probably do it first week of August. We hate to challenge that deadline. And then from there, we'll get the agreements out to the various subrecipients, ask them to be signed, hopefully get all of that wrapped up by 10/1, which is the start date of the fiscal year. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions. We can talk about the federal programs. We can talk about the state programs as well, if you'd like. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from anybody from the board?
I have a quick question, Chuck, regarding that spreadsheet that we looked at when looking at all those numbers. I don't know if you're able to pull it up or not, but my question is on those numbers, on those high dollar amount that you have for TBD, whether it's public facilities projects or public services projects, can you give us a couple of ideas of what these things can be? I understand obviously they're not planned yet. You don't have necessarily a specific project for each of them, but just to understand the difference, for instance, between what you have in the TBD public facilities and then the TBD, COVID public services. What are these kind of like examples what these could be?
Well, the public facilities projects, now also keep in mind too that we're relying on, we have a funding source now, NSP3. We have about $575,000 left in that funding. That money, we are going to try to convert that to CDBG, which is allowable. So we have to, that has to happen before these projects before these funds can be available. Nonetheless, we budgeted them because we expect that to happen. So the public facilities projects, you see $200,000 line item there. Can everybody see that? Okay. So I know that I've had communications with our Parks and Rec department, and they have several projects that they'd like to see get done with the help of CDBG that are CDBG eligible. Improvements to rec centers and the different facilities they have within their rec centers. Belmont Park is an example, is that type of project, although it's budgeted. There are other opportunities with our Parks and Rec department. The other groups that we deal with, if they, during the year, have a need for a public facilities improvement, they can come to us, they can apply. We leave that application process open all year so they can do that. As long as the funding's available, we'll consider that project.
And does the application process look the same for an outside entity versus Parks and Recreation for the City of Clearwater? Okay.
Yep.
And are those funds limited to improvements in specific areas because they're CDBG dollars, or can it be anywhere in the City of Clearwater?
Has to serve a low mod, has to have a low mod benefit, a low to moderate income benefit. Now that can, with public facilities projects, that's usually, well, with our Parks and Rec department, that's achieved by the location of the facility and the community they serve. So, for example, North Greenwood Recreation Center, they serve our North Greenwood neighborhood revitalization strategy area. So that qualifies. Lake Bellevue, the Ross Norton Recreation Center serves that community, so we can help there. Longset, a little bit of a different animal, but you know, it depends on what came through with that one. Some of the other facilities, an example, St. Vincent de Paul, they serve a low mod income client. So that's more of a low mod income benefit, where a rec center is more of a low mod area benefit. So you have to have one or the other to meet the CDBG requirements. To continue answering your question, so really, the public services, TBD. So as I mentioned, HUD has raised the 15% cap. Okay, so anything we spend above that 15% cap needs to be spent responding to COVID-19. We can't use that cap for other reasons, because HUD raised that cap for a purpose. We have to use those funds for that purpose. So right now, we've signed contracts for public services towards COVID-19 in excess of the cap in the current fiscal year. We did that. The board approved that at our last meeting in May. And those public services are related to homeowners and foreclosure counseling. We're funding, giving some additional funds to Gulf Coast Legal Services to kind of, there's some synergy there with our foreclosure counselors and Gulf Coast Legal. We are certainly open to any other applicants or folks or organizations that feel that they can affect COVID-19. We'll maybe wait a little bit into the summer, see how conditions evolve. Perhaps we may put out a NOFA, Notice of Funding Availability, to see who out there can try to affect, you know, a positive outcome with some of these issues. So kind of leaving that money where it is. As soon as we find a really worthwhile service that we can put towards that, we will. We're certainly open to any.
Are those dollars able to be used for, you know, people that lost their jobs due to COVID-19, weren't able to pay rent, or is that because it's individuals? Would that be separate?
We have started a rent, mortgage, and utilities assistance program. Okay, now the county really has the larger program, and the county has, when they opened that program, they earmarked, or they anticipated spending somewhere in the neighborhood of $75 million. You know, we have about $600,000. So we're very limited. So our program was designed to complement the county's program. So not to get too much into the weeds on this, but the county's program, they serve up to 200% of the poverty limit. Okay, we can serve up to 80% of area median income. So we're going to serve people that don't qualify for the county's program because their income is too high, up to 80% of area median income. Problem is the county's program is like this, ours is like this. And what I mean by that is, let me back up. With a household of one, the county can serve up to about a household making $25,000. Our program, 80% AMI, about $37,000. When you get to a family of four, the difference is about $4,000. When you get to a family of five, the 200% of the poverty level exceeds area median income. We can't help those people. Our funding sources don't allow. So we can only serve that gap of households of 1 to 4 people between 200% of the poverty limit and 80% of area median income. So there's a very tight window of households we can help. But we put that program out there. We did a press release last week. We're getting a lot of applications that don't qualify because it's really not an intuitive thing. It's not really easy to understand these income levels and you know, I mean, I understand it. It's the work that I do, and I know you all understand it. But it's hard to articulate that when you put out a press release without getting people to roll their eyes. You want them to read it and understand it. We're taking referrals from the county. The people that apply for us that we think are better suited for the county's program, we send them to them. We're doing the best we can with it, but we haven't had a lot of successful applications. But we're creating awareness of the programs, which is one of the things we wanted to do.
If I may add, remind me, TBD COVID is for public services, so we cannot use those funds for those other types of first direct payment assistance to
Okay.
individuals.
Okay.
Because it's a public service bucket of money. And also, these are COVID dollars that we can expend only after 10/1. Because remember, we're
Correct. Correct.
looking at that fiscal year.
But there was an organization that had funding to to help with rent assistance.
Right.
We could pay them to process that at administration fee with those services, but not direct payments. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
I have a question, Chuck. On the spreadsheet, you have the CDBG entitlement and the allocation. I also see the home, but I couldn't find the SHIP allocation on this spreadsheet.
Okay, the SHIP is it's on the far right side. If- It's because I have the wrong spreadsheet.
Okay. Yeah, I looked and I'm like, where's the SHIP money allocated to?
Yeah, it's at the top left, but it doesn't, it shows allocation but not the detail.
Yeah, it doesn't show where it's allocated to. It just shows the amount of money.
Let me look at this. Okay, this far right corner, it's not labeled properly. It is SHIP.
Oh.
That is the SHIP
That is
budget
the
for the
SHIP.
year, okay? So you can see here, we've added the administration in for the entitlement.
I'm just trying to look it up here.
Yeah, and that's the administration for the program income. So SHIP, as you all know, is housing only. There's no community development with SHIP, very similar to the home program. So here's what we have with SHIP. So we're working on, we put out an RFP for a development in North Greenwood, a multifamily development, small multifamily development. We had 2 proposals. We would have had that process probably completed by now, the approval of that. But we're just, obviously recent events have stalled that. That's something over the next month I want to restart. I want to address those applications, put together a committee to review them, and finalize the planning for a project in North Greenwood. So we're planning on putting some home money in there and also some SHIP. So these monies are estimates. We need to negotiate, we need to underwrite, we need to figure out what that need really is, what that gap is in order to fund that project and make that project successful. So that's what that project is. As you all know, we do a lot of land acquisition for single-family homes. We can do it for townhomes, other home ownership projects. Homeowner rehab, we have a pretty robust single-family rehab program. That's where that money is. We do owner-occupied new construction, Habitat for Humanity, Ms. Camacho, her organization. We work very, very well with them. We had a dedication yesterday of a home that was just completed, 2 dedications actually. Multifamily rehabilitation, we're working on a project right now where we can get some of those funds out the door. That should close in July. That project is Lexington Club Apartments, south of Court Street, between Myrtle and Missouri. It's a rehab project. We're looking at our funds funding, I think, 7 units, although it's a much larger project with other funds, which will all be rehabilitated. Then we have multifamily land acquisition, down payment assistance. We fund largely through our SHIP, and down payment assistance for new homes. There's a different subsidy we can put towards that. So that's really an estimate of our SHIP program for the year. Our SHIP entitlement was very encouraging this year. That number is incorrect right there. Our entitlement this year was up over $1 million. Okay, and that's on the heels of the last 2 years where we got, I think, 176,000, and this current year we're just over 200. So very nice that very encouraging that the Florida legislature changed its tune on the sweep of the Sadowski Act. So well, we hope that continues, certainly. Answer your question, Ms. Camacho?
Yes.
And Ms. Hebding, did I complete answering your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else on the board who has a question? Are there any questions or comments from the audience?
Can I just speak from here?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And you can speak from.
I had a question about,
I'm sorry, you need to pick up the microphone. And you need to identify yourself, masked lady.
Kathleen Beckman, Clearwater resident. When Camille brought up the funding for the projects, public facilities projects for lower income communities, I was thinking, would something like a pool heater for the rec center pools, so those communities could use the pools a lot longer, like Morningside Meadows, I think, has a heated pool, and those people, the kids in that community can use it a lot more. Would something like that fall into? Because you mentioned Parks and Recs might want some of that money.
Yeah. You have other questions, or you want me to respond?
Oh, yeah, would that, something like that might qualify?
You raised that question in one of our community meetings, and we're,
Microphone check.
I can step away from here.
that's okay. I'd rather sit. Is this on?
No.
It should be, I don't have any control on it.
Hello?
No.
Is there a microphone I can move closer to you here?
I guess we can share that one.
I'll step away. I don't want to breathe out there.
Thank you, Ms. Beckman. So you raised that at a community meeting that we had when we were going through our consolidated plan. And we raised the question with our HUD rep about pool heaters. And it's not quite as simple as it seems. We had communicated back and forth by email whether, and I'll go back and find that.
I double check, but yeah.
Yeah, so my recollection of exactly how it phased out is not completely clear, but I believe the distinction is you have to be very careful when you get into an item like that, because you have to differentiate between maintenance and an improvement. So if we can demonstrate that a new, for example, pool heater is an improvement because it will provide greater access to that pool at times of year when other people wouldn't, then I think it's defendable. Now, if it's a public, if it's a heater that needs repair or replacement, that's a little bit higher bar that we need to follow. But that's something that if that request came in, we would certainly evaluate it and see, if we can fund that without getting our fingers chopped off by our HUD rep. So, all of these things, as we're bound by regulations, and we don't have any choice but to follow them. We don't challenge them. There's really no way to do that. We work hard at making sure the things that we approve and the things that we recommend are compliant, and that's our job. That's our job. Create public awareness of the funds we have available so the best projects come forward, and then we evaluate those projects based on need, based on eligibility. Sure.
There you go.
So you said that you have projects that we're excited about for this year, housing projects that are in the works. Can you just, provide a few more details about the good news, about good projects that are coming?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about the North Greenwood project. We own about a third of an acre up in North Greenwood. There is some available land just to the south of it that's owned by another community service organization. We think we can either combine the projects, the two lots into one project, or have two separate projects, but nonetheless create some new product in North Greenwood for rental housing that would meet the low mod criteria, 80% area median income. So that's very exciting. We have property about an acre and a third down in Lake Bellevue, just south of Ross Norton, right on South MLK. I've discussed this property with the board before. We put out an RFP at one point. That didn't phase out. Since then, I've been pitching it to the developers that we do work with, hoping we can get some interest. There are two firms that are interested in that project. So that project, the densities, I think, are somewhere in the neighborhood of allowable 22, 23. I think that would overwhelm the site a little bit. I think it'll be scaled back from that. But we'll see what our partners want to accomplish there, and we'll see what works out. We had trying to think. Project we had envisioned with the school board is on hold. I think we've discussed in the past that property, the school board's property, that they were going to contribute to that project. We own adjacent property. The school board's property we've recently found to be an old cemetery for African Americans that was to have been relocated back in the day and apparently has not been. So more to come on that. That's an obvious issue that we need to respect, and we will. So that's on hold.
Was that the North Ward, or is that a different property?
That's a different property. It's near the HEP site. It's no, that's Clearwater Intermediate, I think is the name of the school. It's just south of the football stadium we have in North Greenwood, Philip Jones Park. It's just south of that. Trying to get my bearings. Russell Street, that area. We used to have a playground near that area.
And the school board owns that property? Is that
School board owns just about that entire block. The only thing they don't own is the corner we own. And we were going to contribute our property to that project, which would give them more development options, give them more densities. Again, on hold. So.
What about the LIHTC projects?
Yeah. So in downtown, thank you, Denise. In downtown, City Council approved the sale of Fire Station 45 last year for a low-income housing tax credit project, and it's the 9% round. And not to get into details on that, what that means is a 9% round is the more competitive round under this program. That program, just to give you an example, that project would have been a $21 million project, and if they got the tax credits, if they were awarded the tax credits, that would have brought in $17 million in capital.
Wow.
And the proposal was, in my opinion, outstanding. It would have been one of the prettiest buildings in downtown. Unfortunately, we finished second. The project, not we, but the developer that we were going to support, finished second, didn't get the tax credits. So there is an option to extend that contract for one more year, for one more cycle, application cycle. And it looks like we're heading in that direction. And there's word that the state may implement some criteria where projects that didn't get funded in a prior year would have an elevated status in the following year. So if that's the case, we may very well see that project come to fruition. There's another avenue that we may try to go down. These 9% tax credit projects, to get a project to the top of the list, it requires a local government preference contribution. Okay, now what that means, it's called a local government area of opportunity contribution. So typically to apply, to qualify, we have to fund a minimum of $75,000. That checks the box. That makes their application suitable. They've represented local government support, right? If we want to get that project to the top of the list, we give that extra money, which in this case would have been about $760,000, okay? There's really only a handful of local governments in the county that can do that, us, St. Pete, and the county. So what we may look to is to those organizations, maybe work together on rotating. You know, when you do that and you know that if you have a project it's going to get funded, it's easier to plan. It's easier for the developer to acquire and plan. When you get, these developers get into these contracts, and they have to pay a lot of money for these contracts because they have to have all of these conditions, all of these outs in the contract. So it's really not that simple to do. Now, if that developer comes in and he knows he's going to get that project because we have an arrangement with the other local governments, it's a much more simple project and process for them to go through. So, not to get off track, but that project may very well materialize. We would split that investment with the CRA, that $760,000 contribution. Half of it would come from the home money, half of it from CRA. We had another project on Sunset Point, and that was a 4% round, which is a lower subsidy, but it's still a tax credit project. That project did not get to the finish line. It did not get, the application was not successful. Let me just say that. Trying to think of any other the other projects that we have. I know we have a couple others.
There could be an opportunity potentially for
Oh,
areas working on that.
of course.
As well as
Yeah, of
north
course.
MLK.
Yeah, probably two of the more impactful projects that we could have. So there are two large sites in the CRA. One of them is on South MLK, between MLK and Washington, right across the street from the Madison Point, the tax credit project that was built a year or so ago. That's about 3.5 acres. We're looking for a developer to come in and bring maximum density. It's about 150 units, which is exactly what you want in downtown. When you talk about that level of density, what you need is structured parking. That takes your development into a whole different criteria. Structured parking changes everything. It completely impacts your pro forma. It takes a different type of developer to pull that off. So that's a tough one for us to do. We're working on that. We have developer interest, certainly. I think we can get to the finish line on it. Once we know we have that developer that has the interest and the capability of pulling that off, we're going to put out an RFP. And I expect that RFP to happen this summer on that project. I do think there's a real good probability that project will materialize. So it'd be 150 units. It would be different scales of, I envision different scales of affordability, starting at 120 AMI. 120 AMI in our market is about the same as market rate. Until you get to a luxury type apartment, 120 is about market rate. So it'd be different. A certain number of units at 120, a certain number of units at 80, and it would even scale down to the very low income brackets where we could serve all income levels. That's how that project looks. We have another opportunity east of that on Cleveland Street, on the north side of Cleveland Street, the 1200 block of Cleveland, just west of the Verizon building. Well, probably not called the Verizon building now. It's about 2.5 acres. We own nearly the whole block. We're looking at a project that has different layers of affordability there as well. We're working with the CRA. That property also has, on the back right corner, a community garden, which has been very, very successful. We're contemplating it, if we can get the stars to align on it, to incorporate that into the development, where you have an urban type farming within the development, and not necessarily the urban farm here and the development here, kind of integrated together. That's the vision of our CRA director, and I think it's a very neat concept. And there's a few out there that we've researched that have worked. So, kind of a cool thing. So we would contribute to that as well. And I think that's probably, for the larger projects, I think that's about what we have. And if those all come to fruition, we're probably looking at really running through most of that funding that you saw on the TDB spread, the TDB funding on that spreadsheet, because that will take some significant investment. Anything else you could think of? Any questions?
Yes, yes, sir, thank you for that.
Before I ask for a motion, there are board members, including myself, that may wish to recuse themselves due to relationships we have with some of the organizations seeking funding. I will welcome direction from Ms. Sullivan, our board reporter. If any board member feel that they have a conflict of interest, please inform the board at this time, and I do.
Obviously, I do also.
All right, so if we could have a motion to approve all the funding less the Salvation Army and the St. Vincent de Paul allocations. And then we'll have separate motions for each of those.
I move that recommended funding for all the agencies minus Salvation Army and St. Vincent de Paul be approved.
I second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. The motion carries unanimously. Can I have a motion to,
I move that we approve the St. Vincent de Paul funding.
And I'll second that.
can we have a vote?
Yeah,
Aye.
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 I don't vote, so that carries. And can I have a motion for the Salvation Army?
I'll make a motion that we approve the funding allocation for Salvation Army.
And a vote?
Second.
Get a second.
Second, and a vote? Aye.
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 And that motion carries unanimously. Does the board have any old or new business to discuss? Are there any comments from the audience? Chuck, are you getting up there to say something? Okay. Are there any other comments from the audience? Ms. Sanderson or Mr. Lane, do you have anything to report?
I do not at this time.
Okay. Item 7, are any board members to be heard? I'm sorry, Chuck.
Just a couple things. Just an update, and we talked about a little bit earlier. At the last meeting, you all approved the amendment to our current annual action plan. So since then, we've started our business, a back to business program, which we've had a number of applicants. Denise and the ED team are working very, very hard on reviewing and approving those grant applications. And that's funded with CDBG. The CDBG COVID money is funding that program. And I think it's a good use of those funds to try to get those businesses and those employees back in action and help them. There's a lot of people out there that are struggling, as you all know. And I mentioned earlier, we started a rent assistance program. We're going to run that through right now and see how that takes through the next few weeks. Pinellas County's program closes on June 30th, so we're going to have to make a decision as we approach June 30th, how we're going to, what we're going to do once their program closes. We have some thoughts. One of the things we may try to do, we may look to our tax credit projects that we funded. They have management in place, a lot of units, 80 units per pretty much, and look to those property managers to say, hey, are there folks that are behind on rent? If so, let's work together on funding these people. That way we're really protecting our investment, protecting projects that are dedicated to affordable housing, so that's a consideration. We don't really have the staff to really open up that program to 0 to 80%, because if we get overwhelmed, we just won't be able to respond. Nor do we have the money. Yeah, nor do we have the funding. So next month, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be asking you all to approve the annual action plan and the consolidated plan. We're on a kind of a tight schedule. Very important that we have a quorum. So please place that meeting on your agenda, on your calendar. It's July 14th, 9 a.m. in this room. Also, a quick update on homelessness. I've been participating in a weekly call. It was twice a week, went to weekly, and it's about to go to every 2 weeks of the countywide working group. I don't know if you've been on that call at all. I know Salvation Army's been represented. And really for us, it's a matter of keeping our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the homeless community, and if and when and where we need to intervene. One of the things I was pretty surprised at and thankful for is we never, our shelters never exceeded capacity. So there's never really a point in time where people didn't have an option. Now, there were a lot of people out there that didn't want to take advantage of those shelters. But, if we can't help those people because they don't want that help, there's not much we can do about it. But that was a very important thing, because if once we exceeded the capacity of the shelters because of COVID-19, we really didn't have much of an answer. So we were monitoring that and making sure that everything stayed the way it needed to, and it did. And I think the shelters have done an amazing job. The service providers have done an incredible job, because we've seen an uptick in homelessness since this started. We in our counts that we do, our monthly counts, we've seen an uptick in Clearwater in homelessness. It's happened. We know it. So it's our obligation to keep an eye on it. We've done it, and we haven't really found that we needed to intervene, really more than monitoring and making sure that things were being managed and handled. So we did keep an eye on that. One of the things we did with our funding is we worked with an organization that has showers and laundry facilities. So we made those showers and laundry facilities available once a week, and we've done that for the last, I think, 2 months now, two months plus. So I think those showers have been set up at the refuge, generally on Thursdays. So that was really well received. That was very much appreciated by the homeless folks. It was $500 a shot, which I think was money very well spent. And then lastly, and probably less important, I think at the next meeting we're going to talk about our board rules. The rules for our Neighborhood and Affordable Housing Advisory Board, they're a bit old. I think we might need to revisit them again and talk about board terms and chair terms. And so we'll just have a discussion on that, and we'll land on something that makes sense and works for everybody. So that's all I have. Do you have any questions?
Anybody of the board, any members of the board have a question? Any of the members of the board have anything they want to say?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Then I guess time to adjourn. Our next NAHAB meeting is scheduled for July 14th at 9 a.m. here in the council chambers of the main library. This board is adjourned. Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.